British Institute in Eastern Africa. Hello, San Diego, and it's now exactly 10 past, it's now 1 minute past 10 in Nairobi, Kenya. Our panelists are all here registered, I believe. We have 3 papers. The first one will be by Professor Simiyu Wandiba from the Institute of Anthropology, Gender and African Studies at the University of Nairobi, and he's going to be speaking about the unstated power in pottery, ethnographic examples from Kenya. Our second paper is quite tricky, Hoe, Knife and Spear, the grand narration of Bantu migration by our Assistant Director, Dr. Frida Nkirote. The third paper will be by Dr. Emmanuel Ndiema from the National Museums of Kenya, and he's going to be speaking about the changing meaning and use of landscape features in ancient and present times, perspectives from Western and Central Kenya. We're going to give each of the panelists about 10 to 15 minutes. I think Professor Wandiba might need 2 minutes, but then after that we're going to take a bunch of questions at the end. So we're giving this panel about 30 minutes.
San Diego, welcome to Kenya. I'm talking about power in social rather than political, in a social rather than political context. Whether it is social or political, power has to do with control. People control other people. They also control things. But things also control people and control other things. And power can be visible or invisible. It can also be real or imagined. Now, why do I talk about unstated power? It is unstated because nobody talks about it. But it is there. People elect not to see it or not to talk about it. And so, as a student of ethnographic pottery, I have observed in different communities of Kenya how people make pots. What things they say about pots? What taboos they have about pots and the potting process? And I have selected a few of these potters who make pots generally as their foremothers used to make them, although they also have acquired new types of pottery in order to satisfy the modern market. Now, one of the groups is known as the Bukusu, who live in Bungoma County of Western Kenya. They are Bantu speakers, and in this community, traditionally, both men and women made pots. But there was a distinct gender dimension in the types of pots that they made. So men potters made pots that are associated with masculine activities. So they made pots for the manufacture and drinking of beer. Because traditionally drinking of beer was the activity that men engaged in, although all women also participated. But then the way the drinking was conducted, the women had very little say in what was being done apart from drinking. The women, on the other hand, made pots that were associated with feminine activities. So they made water pots and cooking pots. And what is interesting is that the beer pots were generally bigger, or they still are, and the water pots and the cooking pots are smaller in size. So here is a situation where patriarchy is expressed without people knowing that the men are telling the women that the women are inferior to them. So they are saying, look here, we make bigger pots, so we have more power than you do. But nobody talks about it. Not even the women notice that. Then they also make ritual pots that are supposed to control the power of the unseen. Twinship in this community is seen as something that can affect the health of not just the family but also the community at large. So you need to do something to neutralize the power of twinship. So you make a pot that has two necks, it has one body, two necks, and two mouths. And then you drink beer from that pot. That way, the pot has power over the harmful effects of twinship. Now, another community that I talk about are the Luo, who are Nilotic speakers, who live in around Lake Victoria, in Western Kenya. And one interesting thing about potting in this community is that it's generally a woman's job. But the women use it in a very interesting way to control other women. In this community, mothers-in-law are very powerful, and whatever they say is basically law. Senior co-wives also control junior co-wives. So in this community, even if you have learned potting from your mother, which is generally the case, when you get married, you forget about that. Your mother-in-law, if you don't have a co-wife, will teach you afresh how to make pots. If you have senior co-wives, they do the same. You have to conform to the local tradition. So here is a situation where I see mothers-in-law and senior co-wives exercising power over their daughters-in-law or junior co-wives. Among the Akamba of Eastern Eastern Kenya who are band speakers, every porter has a mark that she puts on her pots as a way of identifying her products. And eventually people get to know by just looking at the marks on a pot that these pots were made by so and so. Now what is interesting in this community is then those women whose products sell more acquire a certain social status, and therefore they are looked upon by other potters as being senior to them. So it is this power that when now, like if you are in a meeting, when they talk, if you assume they are in a meeting, when these women talk, the others listen. So they have controlling power over them. The Torobo Rohada gatherers of Samburu County made pots. The Samburu, like their Maasai brothers and sisters, don't make pots because they see it as something that is demeaning. Yet, they need pots for certain ceremonies. Because the beer that is used in those ceremonies, like changing from one age set to another, has to be made in pots. But because the Samburu see the Torobo as inferior people, when they go to ask them to make pots, to ask these women to make pots, at first they are very arrogant to them. They demand and say, I want a pot. But because the woman knows that there is no way this man is going to force her to make the pot, she will keep quiet. So eventually, the man has to come down and accept the fact that if he continues to treat this woman the way he's doing, he will go back empty-handed. So the woman then becomes the more powerful, and she can do anything she wants, and this man will be subservient to her. Finally, we have the Teso of Busia County, which borders Western Kenya, bordering Uganda. And the interesting thing about potting among this community, unlike their neighbors, is that potting is a man's job. Women do not make pots. But there are certain activities that the men cannot do. Like carrying the clay from the quarry, fetching the water that is used in the manufacturing process, fetching the firewood that is used in firing the pots. So, despite the fact that potting is a man's job, the women are crucial in the manufacturing of the pots. Also, if the pots have to be carried by head load to the market, it's the women who do it. And so the women exercise subtle power that is unstated because the men have to plead with them so that they can undertake those activities which they themselves cannot undertake. But nobody recognizes that as the power of women over the men. Thank you.
Perfect timing. So then, can we hear more about thoughts from Bantu Migration with Freedom Party?
My paper tonight is, I'm going to talk about hoe, knife, and spear. A grand narration of Bantu migration. I'm going to talk about an old story which is very controversial. It has been talked about for a very long time by archaeologists, by linguists, since they don't seem to agree on where the language of Bantu came from. Because the language of Bantu is spoken by a third of population in Africa. So it's believed that it originated from the Cameroon-Niger border, and then down to Central, East, and Southern Africa. This story came about in the 50s, when the linguists realized that the Bantu people were not only the majority in Africa, but also they had a lot of powers that they used to suppress everyone else that they came across. So when they came up with this story, they looked at iron. They used the words that are used by different Bantu people, which define or describe iron. And some of these words would be words like iron ore, like spear, no, not spear, like hammer, like furnace that is used for smelting iron, and anything else that could be used as the root term for iron working. And what they found out, or what they thought, is that the Bantu people must have learned this from where they came from, and it gave them a lot of power to move across Africa. So the point that one tends to see here is that because of the power of iron, they were able to subdue everyone that they came across. They were also able to subdue the environment, harsh environment, because they moved they came through the tropical forest. That is what equatorial forest. That is how it is believed. And apart from the iron, the other things that are looked at, like farming of root crops and also pottery. So the question that this paper seeks to answer, actually it's an attempt to question the role of materiality in creating archaeological identities and the use of archaeological materials to validate linguistically constructed theories. So when the linguists came up with this story, they had to find evidence for the story. So they had to go to archaeologists, and the archaeologists had to provide the evidence of iron working, because they have already found that the iron working is coming from Bantu. So what happened is that the archaeologists started looking for sites which were producing iron, and if they find a site that has iron, then they know that the Bantu people have been there. But sadly, they were only going to places where the places that are currently occupied by Bantu people. What that means basically is that they are assuming that the Bantu people have been here in these places from the beginning, or nobody else has ever been there. So they are looking at the archaeological materials whichever material they find they attribute to Bantu, and then they ignore all the other parts of the region. So some sites that have been found with Bantu materials, or so-called Bantu materials, are around the Lake region, that is Lake Victoria, where we have the Orewe pottery, and then we have some sites along the East African coast, and sites around the Mount Kenya region. And if you look closely, these are places which are currently occupied by Bantu people. So this narrative made the archaeologists have a lot of arguments between themselves, because some felt that through dating, some felt that some of the movement was from south to north, while others were saying from north to south. And some of the linguists were really amazed by what the archaeologists were doing, because the archaeologists, instead of finding their own independent data, they were trying to fit within the linguists' data. So that actually was a problem in itself. And so the debates were back and forth between the archaeologists themselves, and then between the archaeologists and the linguists and historians. So historians took the stories of the archaeologists and they started citing each other in circles. Now, the reason why African history has been told in this way, it's because we have our history written from the colonial times, which is very late. That is about the 18th century, the 19th century. And because we don't have written records, we have people coming up with all theories and then trying to validate them so that they can fit within our histories. And so how can we use these histories, actually whatever has been generated through this kind of data, to write our own histories? Are these histories actually valid? So without actually dismissing what has been the research that has been done before, I want to say the power of iron in this sense is that it's a revolutionized, first of all, in our history. When you talk about history, when you talk about iron ore, I mean hole, the one for digging, which the Bantu people are using, it's a revolutionized the economy, because then, before that, the people who are living before the Bantu, they were using, they only used to farm cereal crops, which you could just sow and then they grow on the ground without having to dig much. But then with the iron tool, then you dig, and if you're if you are planting root crops, you are able to dig and to remove the subsoil. That means that you can dig deeper, and then you can plant root crops. So that's changed in terms of economy. So we are able to get that story. Then we are also able to get the story of migration itself. That is, if you want to believe that they actually marched from the Cameroon down to Southern Africa and Eastern Africa, because it gave them power to cut through the forest, to cultivate more, and to have surplus. So because of surplus, they were able to have more power than the people that they found before them. They were able to have larger populations, which were able to suppress or subdue everyone else. So in this case, they were able to start now building kingdoms. And so how are they able to suppress others? It's through the use of spear. And the spear here again is the power of iron. So how our histories have been told using, and it's not all the histories here, it's mostly the history of Bantu migration, which is such a controversial story because it's told in a linear way, like there was nothing else on the side or what. It's just about the Bantu moving, using iron, walking across the equatorial forests, cutting trees, and in fact some archaeologists refer to them as barbaric warriors. because they are able to come and suppress everybody and do what they want. So is this really a true representation of African history? The reason I'm asking that question is that because a template was formed, which was used for measuring how the Bantu people moved, where they occupied, and what they ate, or whatever they did. But then, when this was being looked for in the archaeological record, it was not necessary at all to make sure that all the other things that might define Bantu were available in those archaeological records. So they looked only at pots and mostly iron. So with or without iron, if a site is within a place where Bantu people are living currently, then a story is told that these people have been here, or they moved from Cameroon or wherever and came to this place. So what that means is that also the story that is told, it's not, in a way, it's not a representation of the African people, because, not the African people, but the Bantu people, because the whole area has not been looked at. So how can you say that you have a complete story? And we've had a lot of people who have actually questioned this, so this is not a new thing that I'm talking about. We've had people who have questioned about this, and they have disagreed in so many ways that first of all, you cannot have people moving or marching across some equatorial forest just because they have iron. The equatorial forest itself is very unfriendly. So apart from cutting down trees, you can imagine all the other dangers in an equatorial forest. We can talk about malaria, we can talk about animals which don't have to be like snakes or anything, which makes it very difficult for people to walk across there. And so my paper today actually, which is just a summary of what has been said about Bantu migration, and which is not new totally, but also it's only an attempt to show that African history is the way they are done, and also because they were also done by people who did not understand the language of the Bantu people, and also people who, because at that time we don't have a lot of African people doing this history. So, or even archaeology, both archaeology, history, and linguistics. So what is presented, and what actually I think the African people themselves should strive to do, is to study this vis-a-vis what is currently available in terms of language, in terms of archaeology, and in terms of if they are to do interviews or whatever they do, they should be doing among people that can understand them and cultures that they understand. Then this can stand on its own in terms of validating what has been said before in terms of this movement. So in conclusion, I don't want to talk much, but in conclusion, I want to say that what I've just talked about has demonstrated the use of language and material or technology can help reconstruct, I don't deny that, reconstruct the identities and histories of African past, although neither linguistics nor archaeology as disciplines can stand alone in this line of inquiry. The danger, as noted above, is that one discipline suggests something, and the other, without its own means of verifying the suggestion, picks it up and supplies the evidence in line with the hypothesis. That is the hypothesis that has been produced by another discipline. In the story of Bantu migration, this was not only evident in linguistics and archaeology, but also in history, where the three disciplines kept citing each other in circles. It is therefore suggested here that African history cannot be told using one line of argument, such as iron working or pottery, but while accepting suggestions from unrelated disciplines, research should treat any received suggestion from unrelated discipline with caution. They should not only seek to augment the proposed hypothesis, but also they should endeavor to find new evidence that might confirm or refute it. In sum, after almost a decade, after several decades of research into Bantu migration story, the world is yet to understand how more than a third of Africa came to be occupied by Bantu speakers. All or Bantu speakers always were there. The early history of Bantu speakers remains unfinished. I'm done.
So next we move on to Dr. Emmanuel Ndema speaking about land use meanings, changing land use meanings and use in Central and Western Kenya.
Just wait for the PowerPoint presentation. Good morning, San Diego. Good evening, Nairobi. In this paper with my colleague, Dr. Christine Ogola, we interrogate the changing meanings of landscape features, both in prehistoric and historic times, in prehistoric and historic contexts, and try to evaluate the significance of these landscape features as spaces that has meaning that endures through time. So we'll try also to report on our recent scientific studies. We interrogate 3 sites in different. Can I move this slide? We interrogate 3 different areas within the country. The first location that we look at the landscape feature, an important landscape feature that has some power that has continued to persist through time from we look at what is happening in the prehistoric record up to the present. And the third one is a site in Western Kenya known as Kakabe. And there is this imposing rock feature that has rock art in it, that has archaeological materials, and it is continued to be used from prehistoric time to the present, and we'll show shortly what has been found there. Another site that we look at a space is in Lokori in Turkana in northern Kenya, and we look at that and how there is a different, these stone pillars that are within landscape, they are archaeological in nature, but they continue to influence, to attract people even up to today. People still use it, people still pay allegiance to them and they visit this site. And then we look at also another site in central Kenya in a rock shelter at a place in Nyeri County called Ngaine, and this feature, though we have not have prehistoric evidence for this site, but we have historical information on how the site was very critical during the liberation struggle in Kenya, and also we go further and try to understand how these sites are being used present as important features that still attract people as a powerful place where people go seeking for some form of reconciliation with their own self. Next slide. So these prehistoric features, as I pointed out, continue to influence the found in different places within the landscape, and are important even as today we see one of it, which we point out later, is the placing of small rocks. As you walk across one of the sites in northern Kenya, you see someone has to put a small rock there, even if you don't come from that area. And at the site of Kakapel, there is this imposing huge rock. It has some rock shelter. We have excavated a number of it, and within that site, we found some grinding stones, human skeletal material like burial, a number of them, which are a few, and it's a lot of rock art also that's within this site, and that's prehistoric. Within the historic context, we find that this site is also used, like revered by another community, Luya community, and the rite of passage within, for those from Western Kenya, is a very significant moment for the young people, in that it's a time whereby it's tested for your courage, and so there's a lot of history on this rock about the person who said the intentions among the Bukus community, Miala Mango, killed a huge snake in this rock. And so even the present community still go to that rock before they start the circumcision ceremony. So they still that going up to the present, still going on. But next slide. Within the same rock shelter, we find that actually people go there and to pray. The Christian faith, they still go to the same space to pray. At the same time, also there is the culture of the eaters of people who live in the area. They hold their own cultural festival within this space. So there's this changing meaning of the same space. So this huge rock within this space acts as a powerful feature that gives exact power to these different communities that live within the area, within the same area. Next slide. Going north, it's found as the site of Lokori and now in Kalakol. This side they have very beautiful rock engravings in them. They have burial cairns within this side. Though not majestic and imposing, but just a space within the landscape that it has meaning that keeps changing through time. From prehistoric, we have a lot of thousands and thousands of rock engravings, but then later on we have those burial cairns. The human skin was buried here, more than 200 burials within that just confined space through time. Next slide. And we see that some of those images that are found within these burial cairns actually present being utilized by the local community by branding their cattle. So there is that people go there and they look at those different geometric motifs that are done on the rock, and they are able to identify them with their clans. And it's the same motif that actually being utilized in branding their cattle. And as I mentioned also, as you walk past to this space within the landscape, you find that you have to pick a small stone and you put there. So there's still that meaning within continuing up to the present, that the people still using. So there's that power on this small space within the landscape that still attracts people up to the present. Next slide. And so going to central Kenya, at the place called Ngaine, though we are not done prehistoric excavation at Ngaine, but it's not uncommon to find, it will not be uncommon to find a site, archaeological material within this site, as there are other sites in Mount Elgon and also closer to Mount Kenya that we will be able to find archaeological material. So the meaning of this, the archaeological significance of the site, we have not been able to document, but we find that this cave was very important during the liberation movement in Kenya, and General Kariba was very strategic. It's written a lot about the significance of this cave in Ngaine in Nyeri County. And because they feel actually like the name itself, it means that the way that God protected them. When we are talking to these Mau veterans, they could not even explain why the colonial soldiers could not see them, because they just went down and disappeared completely. And the colonial soldiers could not even see them. So they that place still, those people revere that place. But at present, we find that people still come again to this place to pray for personal and communal reasons. So this place also doubles up as a tourist attraction within this place. So we found this lady, she says she's been there for seven days praying, and she was praying for the nation. That's before the early this year, so that we could have a peaceful coexistence. So there is a lot of meaning that associated with this confined space within the landscape. Next slide. So, as I said, the place continues changing meaning, and it symbolizes power of this space just within the landscape feature that attracts different changes through time, from prehistoric, historic to contemporary, and still attracts and acquires meaning from different perspectives. Next slide. So, what is it in this landscape that creates such a power for specific place within the landscape? Maybe it's uniqueness, it's lack of understanding of origin, that even the present, because we do not understand the present, what this place, the meaning of this space at present, we are able to assign meaning, and it exerts its power on the local people. Next slide. And why people recognize these spaces, although they serve at different communities through time, historic, and the reverence of this place. So we try to understand that even at present, as population increases, there's a lot of demand for land and other resources. We find there's still little spaces within the landscape that is such power, and they're still revered, that even if you give somebody land, they will still not be comfortable taking that place. It acts also as a place of identity with these people. Next one. And so, as a starting place from so we see painting, engravings, intentional, and other signs of sacrificial offerings. Next one. This next one. Yeah. So we conclude. We say that actually we argue that these landscapes are complex phenomena that combines elements of space and time and represents political as well as social and cultural constructs. And these spaces have evolved over time as human activity changes. And these spaces have acquired different meaning and continue to shape the day-to-day life of a complex and increasingly multicultural present-day society. And finally, we thank the different institutions and people who have supported our work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. So can we just ask the panelists to come back on so that we can take quick questions? Just a recap of what that panel was about. It's a continuation of the power of things in African histories panel that we just streamed previously. And Professor Wandiba's paper kind of talked more generally about gender and ports and how that plays out. And what he constantly talked about was the idea of power over, women having power over men because there are taboos that are associated with collecting firewood or water or clay for port making, even when port making is a man's job. He also spoke about how pottery is passed down, whether you inherit it or whether people will do it for markets, especially amongst the Akamba, that you acquire social status because you make the best pots and your pots have more value. Then moving on to Dr. Nkrote's paper, which was about iron and iron working, in, especially about the grand narrative of Bantu migration. She spoke about the role of materiality in the making of archaeological identities and kind of gave us an overview of the debate between linguists and archaeologists and the debate amongst archaeologists themselves about the Bantu migration. And I think what Frida kind of built for a bit on was this idea of a true representation of African history, which we'll go back to in question time. And finally, Emmanuel Ndiema's paper, very fascinating, I must say, about the prehistoric evidence on contemporary and prehistoric evidence and contemporary evidence of landscape use and the changing meanings of landscapes. And he spoke about the evolving meaning of, for example, rock shelters and the way that people use caves and how they continue to acquire new meanings in contemporary times. And in his discussion, he talked about the recognition of the power of landscapes in the contemporary age, which then takes us back to how these meanings are passed down, or what exactly changes in the way in which we think of these rock sites, or the way that even with pebbles and mounds that people in Kenya use. So this is the native intelligence panel, and we'll give a chance to the people in San Diego to ask questions. And then we'll alternate and try to take questions from here and San Diego. Please keep your questions brief. We would really appreciate that. Thank you. From here? Any questions for the natives? This way. I'll take a first question. Please give us your name.
My name is Faith.
Who?
Faith.
Faith. Sorry.
Yes. And my question goes to Professor Wandiba. Does it really mean that women were not really inferior as you're meant to think? Because if they used poetry to control the men in some way, it means that they were not really inferior in some way.
Any other question for Professor Wandiba, particularly, so that he can follow? Yeah, there's a question at the back.
Yeah, my name is Angela. Professor Wandiba, what exactly is the problem with twins among the institutions? that you need to neutralize imports.
Okay.
A third question for Professor Wandiba. Okay, I'll take questions for Dr. Nkirote, Frida.
Now let me know, please.
If we don't have this table. Okay, it's fine.
Yeah, the first one. I know you have done some courses in gender, and you are familiar with the concept of patriarchy and how socialization is used by men to make women feel and act as inferior people where men are. So, even when women have power over men, they will not show it. And I can give you a very practical example. Even when a woman knows that she's stronger than the husband, she will allow the husband to beat her. Not because she is weaker than the man, but because she has been socialized to believe that she is actually weaker than the man. So when these women play those roles, which are very crucial, because if they do not carry the clay from the quarry, bring water, they are the ones who dry the pots, they bring firewood for firing, then there will be no pots. But the men tell them that making pots is a man's job. It is not the woman's job. But the women have that power. If you mistreat your wife, she can refuse to do to carry out those duties, and then you will have no pots. That is my argument. Now, twins among the Bokusu are a sign of bad omen, especially if they are the firstborns. Two, the twinship, if not properly treated, can harm you physically. We literally translated, it can burn you. So to neutralize that, you make beer and drink from that ritual pot. So you are neutralizing the harmful effects of twinship. So here, the pot has power over the, what do you call it? The supernatural, yeah, it has power over the supernatural, which we of course, as ordinary people, don't realize that. That's why the power is unstated. Maybe I should say invisible. Is it invisible?
Unstated is one.
I think unstated is, yeah, because it is there, but nobody says this is the power.
Shall we take more questions? From Nairobi, clearly. For Frida and Emmanuel. So there's a question there. Just introduce yourself and tell us who your question is for.
Yeah, I'm Joshua. And I'll, first of all, I would say that it's true that for the Bantus, like for example, Kisumu, it was claimed by the Bantus before the name of James came in. But does it really mean that the Bantus were explorers, the first black explorer? I don't know how I say that, but the first explorers around Africa before these other people, these other tribes could come and notice it. Since you named them, you say that they are the guys who rule with iron, something like that.
More questions for Frida? I guess that was your question. Silka.
Are there any other narratives on Bantu origins?
Is that for Frida?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My question sort of ties into that question. Frida seems to be talking about a possible other origin of the Bantu outside the rainforest, because you don't understand why they're supposedly traveling out of the rainforest just because they have iron. Is there another source? Where else would they be coming from?
Can you answer those?
Yes. About Bantu being explorers, they're not exactly explorers as presented in history or archaeology or whatever. There was a push factor. That means there's something that's made them live where they were living before, probably because they have been able to have surplus of food, and then there's a lot of the population grows, and so they need to move to new lands where they can be able to cultivate more, and also to be able to feed their populations. So they're not just going out there looking and checking and like trying to discover new places. It's as a question of need. That is how it is presented. And then about other narratives, the research itself was actually about the language, how the Bantu language has spread around Africa. And some people thought it has spread through the migration story, whereby the Bantu people themselves have walked and moved around speaking this language, and other less powerful people or communities, hunter-gatherers for that matter, abandoned their language and took the Bantu language. The other story is about diffusion, whereby probably there wasn't movement at all, but the language moved through diffusion. Yeah, so that people did not move, but the terms that they use might have been borrowed by other people who are their neighbors, and then, it diffuses like that. And then the other story is that probably the Bantu people were here like forever. So the story is told like it's abrupt. The presence of Bantu is like it's abrupt. Unlike the other stories that we see in archaeology, where when they change a toolkit, for example, when they change from early stone tools to middle stone tools, you are able to see from early Stone Age to middle Stone Age, you are able to see the transition, yeah? Or from middle Stone Age to later Stone Age, you're able to see the transition between that and that. But with Bantu, it's abrupt. They just come, the stones are no longer being used, they're using metals. So some people say this might not have been the case. It might have been that these people were here and then they discovered iron ore and how to smelt, or they must have gotten it from somewhere, and so it was not gradual. It's something that happened with time. So those are the narrations that are told. But then we have also oral histories, recent oral histories, where different Bantu people talk about where they came from to occupy where they are today. So that is quite recent. And in research, oral histories which are older than 300 years are not seen to be, authentic. So, so this is the reason why you have to find other evidences to validate such oral histories. And then to you, Christine, I think have I answered it?
I feel answered.
Yeah, I think I've answered it. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take the last round of questions for Emmanuel. The panelists are also allowed to ask fellow panelists questions. Yes, there's a question there and we have a question at the back. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Faith Libe. Now to you, Emmanuel, on the case of northern part of Kenya, whereby we have was it Kapaleni or something? Kakapeli, yeah. Okay, does it mean that those stones have initial information about archaeology, or is it that they were made there and they were placed there by the people who went there, and through that people get to understand something from them, or why is it that it's an attractive place whereby people go visit, go visit and get more attracted to as tourists, or is it specifically, is it what is the archaeological meaning about those stones specifically?
Shall we take Angela's question? Angela?
Yes.
Yeah.
For the people living around Caracol, what is the significance of placing the little stones on the pillars, and what happens if you don't do that?
Thanks. For Kakapel, yes, there's archaeological evidence. We just excavated last month, just under the rock shelter itself. We found 2 burials, same burial position for the human skeleton, a lot of archaeological materials, stone tools, pottery, ostrich shells. We are at present analyzing those. And then it's rock paintings just on that rock surface itself. So a lot of archaeological information that goes back. We are at present, I think, maybe up to even 4,000 years before present. So it has a very deep archaeological history that goes back into time. But as I say, it keeps changing. Like at present now, there are people go there with their loved ones and just over the weekend and just sit under the tree and just enjoy the landscape, just sit there. And there are people who come there, especially to come and pray. So there's a lot of meanings that people come there with different objectives. And we want to believe also, like some from our experience elsewhere, we've seen also some of those burials also could be reburials. It could not be like the fresh skeleton was buried. It could be bones that were brought there. And we've seen that from examples from elsewhere in northern Kenya. With regard to Kalabal side, they say that if you don't put there, you don't place there a little stone, you get bad omen. So I always don't want bad omen, so I always end up putting. I've never tested what happens to myself. I always do every time I go past there, I have to put it.
Where does the stone come from?
Yeah.
You come from the stone? Yeah, from the rocks all over. So you just pick someone, place it there, and you go, off you go.
Interesting. So we're just about to close this panel, but I have kind of like curiosity questions for Emmanuel and perhaps Christine. Has any archaeological work been done previously on these sites, particularly Kakapel and all these sites that you've been to recently? And what archaeological record is there? And then for Frida, you said something interesting about African people writing their own histories, and I was just wondering whether you think that if Africans write their history, then the historical record is going to be a lot more representative or correct, and what does that actually mean?
Okay, I'll go first. For the archaeological material. For Kakapel, the previous has not been archaeological work been done there, but we are doing it at present. So thanks for the support from British Institute and the students. So we are after working on it. For Northern Kenya, there is a group from Stony Brook University, and they are working there. They just published, there's some publication coming up now. But for a long time, for working time, there was no archaeological work done, especially for the Holocene, latest archaeology. So there's work coming up now.
I think at Kakapel is just the rock art that have been published on, but no archaeological research has been undertaken there.
I think Giladi did some work there, but he, yeah.
Is it published?
No, I don't think it's published. For his masters, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I'll try to respond to you, Leo. That's a difficult question, but I'll try to answer it in that when I said that African people should write their own histories, because they understand probably the language, it's because even when you look, when you read through history books, you might find some words or things that are not exactly the way they are pronounced or said in the African language or in a certain language. Or I'll give you an example about the Ogiek people who live somewhere in where do they live? In Mau Forest and other places around the Rift Valley. There's a likelihood that they were living around Mount Kenya region before, and they interacted with the Kikuyu and the Meru and other people living around Mount Kenya region, but this history is not known. The reason I'm saying this is that because I found from the archives some document which was written in 1909 by what is his name? One of the very early anthropologists, I remember the name, or ethnographer. It's not Beach. And he had a list of words, yeah? So he compared the words from the Kalenjin language. The list of words was from the Ogiek. So he listed 50 words from the Kalenjin, from the Ogiek, and he tried to look for their source. He was able to find words from the Kalenjin community and other words which were Ogiek, which he said the original Ogiek. But there was another long list inside that he was not able to tell where it was coming from. And that remains unknown until today, but it's in record that these words are not known where they're coming from. On looking at those words, being the Meru that I am, and knowing the Meru language, I was able to see things like mountain in Kimeru, river in Kimeru. So then if I'm to write a history, then I'm able to say that there is a relationship between the Ogiek people who are living out there and the people who are living around Mount Kenya region today, using the language. So this is why I'm saying, as much as I'm not dismissing what everyone else has done before, there is that need for the African people themselves to do their own histories. And also, when you do interviews, especially if you're a foreigner and you're doing interviews with interpreters, whatever you record is not necessarily what was said by the person that you're interviewing. So then, is it representative enough? So this is where I was coming from.
So, thank you everyone, and thank you to the panelists. I don't know what time you go to bed, but this is really a great honor for you to stay here on a Friday night. I would like to welcome you for hanging out. We're going to be here for a while, for as long as you want, or for as long as we run out of drinks. In the other building, Kilwa building, there's an exhibition going. So there are other people that you might meet from the continent, from Southern Africa and Eastern Africa, who are here for an exhibition. And welcome, and thank you really, really so much. Thank you, Paul and your team. Thank you, San Diego.